Almost enough games to fill a 6-slot cabinet.
Here's 5 reasons.
Hi there, I'm Roger the Retro Gaming Puppet, and this is 5 Reasons, the show where I tell you about 5 games stranded on a single format. And, well, since it's the summer of the 100 mega shock, that means there's only one thing for me to do. Or maybe not. The Neo-Geo is an interesting system because there are actually 3 distinct formats for Neo-Geo games. The MVS arcade format, the AES home system, and the Neo-Geo CD, a system that came a few years later and made home games much more affordable than the often $200 plus cartridges for the AES. And strange as it may seem, all these formats had at least a couple 2-tree games that were exclusive to them, never seeing the light of day on the other 2 incarnations of the hardware. With that in mind, in this episode, we're not only covering games that have never left the Neo-Geo for any other system, but 5 games that were only ever released as MVS carts, never on AES or CD. And that might seem weird, like, how would you own an MVS? But as it turns out, owning an MVS is honestly the cheapest way to get a Neo-Geo these days. The arcade boards are pretty cheap and can be consoleized. And a Neo-Geo 1-slot board connected to a Supergun is how we play our Neo-Geo games. And that's a big part of why I'm starting with this one, because it's counterintuitively the easiest way to own a Neo-Geo these days. So let's do it. Here's 5 reasons to own a Neo-Geo MVS. This is kind of a weird one. Developed by Produce, the same folks behind Triada's Super Bomberman titles, Neo Bomberman nonetheless feels like a step backwards for the series. Don't get me wrong, it's a competent Bomberman game, with most of the things you'd come to expect by this point in terms of core mechanics. The normal suite of power-ups, animal buddies to ride on, big weird bosses. But every stage is a single screen. And because it's a Neo-Geo game, there's only 2-player multiplayer, which, this game came out in 1997, the year after Saturn Bomberman, which featured 10-player versus matches. If you're a Bomberman completionist, I'd say give it a go. If not, or if you have more than one friend around to play against, I'd recommend Saturn Bomberman, one of the later Super NES entries, or really almost any other game in the series. Also, let's get this out of the way here. I usually talk prices in this show, but almost all the games I'm talking about here are in the multiple hundreds of dollars for legit copies, so unless you're a big-time Neo-Geo collector, find another way to play them. I suspect that someone somewhere has a deep and abiding love for the Mr. Do series of games, which has more entries than you might be aware of. The original Mr. Do is basically a ripoff of Dig Dug, then there were 2 games that were single-screen platformers, kind of like Donkey Kong, and then one that's basically Quicks, that one puzzle game that inspired a bunch of different softcore porn puzzle games where you reveal pictures of naked ladies. Yeah. There's a Mr. Do version of that. Fortunately for most of us, Mr. Do does not appear naked. What was I talking about? Oh, right. Neo Mr. Do. It's the last game in the series and it goes back to the original Dig Dug style. It's a classic single-screen arcade game, and if that trips your trigger, you might like this one. For my part, I'd rather just play Dig Dug, or Dig Dug Arrangement, which Namco released in arcades, also in 1996. I'm glad Universal was able to keep making games in this series into the mid-90s, but I am honestly quite confused about who this is for. Were there people dying for a new entry into the Dig Dug but with a clown series in 1996? I suspect not. Similarly to the last game, if you don't have a big attachment to the franchise, you can safely skip this one. Are you starting to sense a theme here? Released by Video System, the folks behind the solid but not amazing shoot-'em-up series Aero Fighters, this is basically a 1996 version of Arkanoid, taken a lot of the same power-ups that game added to the already dated by 1986 brick-breaking genre, started by Atari's Breakout in the 1970s. Unfortunately, the big problem with this game isn't that it's bad per se, but that the Neo-Geo hardware doesn't exactly work in its favor. While, yes, there was technically one game released for the Neo-Geo that used a trackball, the standard hardware only had a joystick. And a brick-breaking game like this needs a spinner for good control. And without it, well, why bother? The good news, I guess, is that this is the one affordable game on this list. So if you really want to own a brick-breaking game ill-suited to its controls for yourself, bare MVS carts can be had for like $60. But generally, save yourself the trouble and play a brick breaker that supports using a spinner, as nature intended. Hey Raj, didn't you already cover this one? I can hear you asking. Well, yeah, kinda. It did get talked about back in our arcade episode, where Joe and Eric from Game vs. Game ditched me to go to the Galloping Ghost in Chicago. But it's too good for me not to mention. And, well, yeah, this one keeps with the theme, being basically a spooky version of Toaplan's Snow Bros. But this is a very fun version of that, and the spooky art is just fantastic. It also lets you be a little more mobile with your flaming enemies than Nick and Tom are with their big snowballs in Snow Bros. Yeah, everything Eric said back in that episode was basically correct. Honestly, for me, the biggest reason to play this game is the gorgeous sprite art. The enemies and bosses have so much personality, it's just really fantastic stuff. Too bad it was stuck here with no other releases, and too bad developer AM Factory doesn't seem to have done much else. Save the best for last. This version of Super Dodgeball not only is MVS exclusive, but weirdly, also appears to be a North America exclusive. It was one of Technos' final games, which is a bummer, but what a note to go out on. Not only is this a fantastic version of a game we absolutely adore, with super throws and, super duper throws, for lack of a better word, which require a special meter to use, and super defensive moves, and even super passes. This one has a fantastic take on the classic Kunio-kun cast, with an art style that is just bursting with personality. Honestly, I don't know why this particular style for the Kunio characters never got used again. I mean, I get that the NES style is iconic, but just take these in for a minute. They're just wonderful. And this game, it's a must play. So yeah, I guess in the later days of the Neo-Geo, there were absolutely a lot of devs who were looking to appeal to the taste of the classic age of the arcade. And, well, that may not have been a winning strategy back in the 90s. After all, every game on this list is either a sequel or a remake or just heavily inspired by a classic arcade title, and most of them seem largely forgotten, so yeah. Ironic now that in the current era of affordable indie games via download services that harkening back to gaming's past actually is a fairly successful gambit most of the time, but so it goes. Maybe a lot of these games aren't worth revisiting, but I will say that the last two on this list are absolutely worth checking out, and if you have any interest, do it. And that does it. But Joe will be back shortly with the final installment of the Summer of the 100 Mega Shock, so stay tuned for that, and I'll see you next time, right here on 5 Reasons. Hey folks, it's Joe. Thank you so much for listening to Roger talk about 5 MVS games that never left the format. If you liked what you saw, do all the stuff that everybody on this site asks you to do. Subscribe if you haven't, like, comment, ring the silly bell. It really does help the channel get more visibility. If you really liked what you saw, consider supporting directly on Patreon or via YouTube channel membership. For just $1 per video, you can get early access to new videos, the chance to vote in polls about what I might do next, your name here with these cool people, and more. There's also one-time tips for Ko-Fi, that link is in the description, as well as merch, which also helps the channel and helps me be able to afford more equipment to make better videos. If you want more Neo-Geo, the full playlist of the Summer of the 100 Mega Shock is on the left, and if you want more Roger talking about Neo-Geo games, the video on 3 Count Bout is on the right.